Hello and welcome to Power to the People with me, Graeme Pryce. This is the 21st 5 Reasons video I've made. And I have to say, I've looked at some thoroughly disgusting individuals so far. Most of them were actual serving Tory ministers in office too, which made their abominable nature so much worse. Still, there's been a few pretentious bellends that weren't Tory MPs. My video about Laura Kunsberg is still by far my most viewed video. There are few that stir a real deep sense of hatred and anger in me though. I'm not a very angry person, generally. Quite the opposite in fact. But Katie Hopkins really is a character that represents the very worst of the scum from the bottom of the ignorant right-wing barrel. So let's have a little look at a few of the things she's said and done. I'm sure this list will be by no means exhaustive. This is a woman who lives to offend and anger, remember. But these are the ones I found in general particularly offensive anyway. I was just looking at my channel analytics and I noticed that 53% of people who watch my videos weren't subscribed. The pain. Come on, just have a quick check that you've subbed, liked and rang the bell. Make a skinny old scouser a little bit happier today. You know what I really dislike? It's a quality that's displayed by so many that claim to care about all sorts of irrelevant or inflammatory issues. It's this attempt they make to ingratiate themselves with working class people and pretend to be one of them, when they really are anything but. Nigel Farage is the prime example, obviously. But there's loads more, and it was practically the ideology of the Tories for the last 10 years, wasn't it? Katie Hopkins is one of those people too. While she claims to be down and dirty with the maligned man in the street who says, "I don't feel like I'm in my own country anymore," because an Asian person sold him a meal deal in Asda and a black guy was driving the bus he went there on. The whole thing, like with most of them, is an act. She grew up in a very affluent and white area of Devon and attended a private convent school for girls, which could go some way towards explaining some of her batshit warped views of reality and decency, couldn't it? She then went to the University of Exeter and later did training at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And that's a story all in itself. But yeah, she knows exactly how Dave from Burnley feels. Yeah, sure you do, Katie. I dare anybody to go into a Wetherspoons or something in a northern town and shout, "I'll buy anybody a pint who went to private school, followed by university, and then did a bit of training in Royal Military Academy Sandhurst." I guarantee you won't have to spend any money. Working class my arse. There's a certain section of people that will say Katie Hopkins is just saying what the common man thinks. No, she isn't, not by a long shot. She's saying things to the common man that she knows are deceitful and dishonest in an attempt to sow the kind of division that she profits from. She's made profiting from division her career. It's her job. In her debut column for the Daily Mail, she started by joking that at least she wasn't stealing children and smuggling them to Asian men in Rochdale. Apparently if you're an Asian guy that lives in Rochdale, you're a nonce, according to Katie Hopkins. She went on to say there were 560,000 illegal immigrants living in the UK, which is why she begrudges paying her taxes. Lovely. She said that in 2015, and she's repeated similar since. And that was before all the small boats and things started, remember, as well. I went and did a little bit of digging, spent some time looking at some figures from 2015. They vary, depending on the source, obviously. The government weren't keeping very good records. But if you're counting asylum seekers, less than 40,000 entered the UK in 2015 and were granted asylum. If you include what you could call actual illegal immigration, in other words, people who claimed asylum but were flat refused, then the number rises to about 85,000. Yeah, it's not 560,000, that is it? Not anywhere near 560,000. Yet she was allowed to tell the whole audience of the Daily Mail that they should be angry because 500,000 illegal immigrants were here, taking their jobs and using their services. No wonder they're angry before they've even had the morning cup of tea or pint of Stella. Apparently she was allowed to say things like that, despite them being completely utter lies and, divisive nonsense, because her column is an opinion piece rather than being an example of journalistic reporting. I'm not sure I believe that anybody at the Daily Mail actually knows what journalism is. Fuck's sake. 560,000. Of course, telling blatant lies is one thing, but lying isn't the only way to rabble-rouse the racist, the ignorant and the hopelessly right-wing. Let's just have a little look at some of the things that Hopkins has come out with. Ramadan typically brings a spike in violence in the Middle East. I get grumpy when I eat, but I don't blow things up. Religion of peace? Huh. Apparently, along with every Asian guy in Rochdale being a nonce, every Muslim becomes a terrorist when they get a bit hangry now too. Remember Ebola? In the wake of the COVID pandemic, some things like Ebola or the swine flu pandemic seem a bit distant, don't they? I remember seeing people literally lying on the front porches dying though, while the African authorities basically went around doing their version of ringing the bring out your dead bell. Katie said about that, "I rather admire the efficiency of Ebola." She claimed it was an effective means of population control in Africa. She once told a gathering of Cambridge University students, "I don't really like fat people and I wouldn't like to meet a ginger in the dark." I'll just leave the sheer nasty ignorance of that one hanging with you there. Around that time she also said, "Suicidal prisoners should just get on with it and kill themselves." Another lovely quote was that people who had tattoos should consider their future because they've branded themselves as common for life. When Lily Allen finally conceived after having 2 miscarriages, Katie took to Twitter and said, during her pregnancy, her pregnancy largely involved gaining 2 stone and looking pretty hideous. What are you bullying pregnant women on Twitter for? Well, speaking of bullying women on Twitter, when Gemma Collins received an award at a plus-size fashion award thing, Katie tweeted, "Congratulations, Gemma, on being fat." Just leave the woman alone, let her have her award. Asked about babies' names once, she replied, "A name for me is a short way of working out what class that child comes from, and I can decide from that, do I want my child to play with that child and mix with that child?" Do you remember when the Tories were absolutely determined to let kids starve during the summer of the pandemic and all voted against providing free meals? Thankfully, the football player Marcus Rashford managed to use his profile to shame the government into a change of direction. Katie thought those kids should have been left to starve though, and she wasn't very happy with Marcus Rashford. So she took to Twitter saying, "Dear Marcus Rashford, do you think women should think about how they are going to feed a child before they decide to have it? I do not want to pay to feed other people's kids. You are welcome to. Thank you, Katie Hopkins." I think we'll just move on from that one. Of course, there's lots of shock jockeys, grifters and paid antagonists out there. Twitter would just collapse into a big pile of edgelords, emos and tech bros just trolling each other continuously if it wasn't. Unfortunately, we live in a country where a lot of the aforementioned anathemas to decency are allowed unfettered access to the media who gladly glorify them. It's not just the paid antagonism that bothers me though. It's the rise of conspiracy theorists and the willingness of millions to believe utterly insane bullshit. I got in a cab the other day. It was only a short ride, thankfully. And the driver was a nice young lady. She was presented very well. She was well spoken. She was driving a lovely car, electric car, strangely enough. Despite trying my best not to, I obviously ended up saying, the uniquely British thing, "Have you been busy, love?" Followed by, "So will you be working late then?" And then I moved swiftly on to, "The weather hasn't been very good this summer, has it, love?" Oh my God, it was as if I'd flicked a switch. She immediately launched into this massive speech about how they are using secret technology to change the weather so that we all believe in climate change. I humoured her a little bit to see where she was going with it, and she moved swiftly onto chemtrails, and she was telling me that she had proof, the absolute irrefutable proof that just couldn't be argued with, was that there were no chemtrails in the air when we were kids, were there? There's something going on. Didn't really fancy getting my phone out and showing her pictures of World War One planes in 1916 leaving trails, or B-52 bombers in the early 40s leaving trails, or jet fighters in the 50s leaving trails, or every single fucking airliner that ever existed leaving trails. Contrails, not chemtrails. I was glad to get out of that cab, obviously, but I thought it was a bit sad to see that nice young lady so obviously obsessed with rubbish and nonsense. I can't imagine what the conversation's like around her kitchen table. I could tell she wasn't stupid, but she was being told to believe stupid things that the news and media were telling her to believe, coming from people that just should not be listened to. Katie Hopkins is one of those people. But she doesn't share silly conspiracy theories like phantom evil entities changing the weather or bloody chemtrails. No, Katie likes to share ones that frighten people. She's recently been trying to tell her right-wingiest of idiotic followers that 15-minute cities are coming, but they must desperately resist, because what it really means is that you'll only be able to go 15 minutes outwards in any direction from where you live. After that, you'll be stopped. It's complete and utter bollocks, of course. I'm not sure if she made it up herself or she's just believed it from some other conspiracy idiot, or she's just heard some other conspiracy idiot say it and she's thought, I'll have that one, that'll work. There's no truth in it whatsoever, obviously. Of course, she's an anti-vax idiot. She regularly appears at truth seeker festivals where right-wing idiots, other anti-vax morons, and people who are still butthurt about having to wear a mask for a few months, like 3 or 4 years ago, pay her to shout lies about vaccines and COVID and 15-minute cities at them. But really, the most insidious and disgusting theory that she promotes is the white genocide conspiracy. It's an extreme far-right idea that foreigners with brown faces are conspiring to slowly destroy the whole Caucasian race via immigration, forced assimilation and genocide. Somehow, not sure how, but somehow it's being controlled by the Jews, which doesn't seem to make her anti-Muslim hatred make much sense, does it? But she's not a very sensible woman, is she? It's a very disgusting one, though. White genocide conspiracy. You'll often hear Katie Hopkins make sardonic comments about having no money during her unhinged TikTok rants or offensive tweets. And for once, she might be speaking the truth. You see, Katie spent so long in the early half of the last decade saying absolutely deplorable things about anything that she liked, that she got to a point where she apparently thought she was untouchable. She found out that she really wasn't in 2017 and 2018. Katie didn't mind living in a country where the government was causing utter misery and sheer poverty and had been doing for years. But she is one of those dickheads that collapses into a blubbering pile of right-wing rage when a protest takes place somewhere that she doesn't agree with, and she is apoplectic if a statue is involved. In 2015, during a protest about austerity, somebody sprayed a fuck Tory scum on the monument to the women of World War II in Whitehall. I don't think those kind of statues are very good examples to bring into protests. But like any normal, sane person, I realise that there hasn't been a spray paint invented that can damage a granite statue. The political commentator Laurie Penny had the same opinion, and she shared it on Twitter, and Hopkins jumped on it immediately and responded by saying that Laurie Penny should be sent to live in the Islamic State. She didn't get the response she wanted from that though, so instead she turned her ugly attention to another attendee of the protest, and she publicly asked poverty campaigner, chef and author Jack Monroe if she had scrolled on any war memorials lately. Jack Monroe reminded her that she had family members in the armed forces and she'd never been implicated in vandalisation of any war memorials in any protest that she'd ever been involved in, and she asked for a retraction and an apology. Hopkins responded by comparing Laurie Penny and Jack Monroe in a tweet, stating that the former is like an irritant while Jack Monroe is like social anthrax. When Jack Monroe expressed some dissatisfaction about that, which I think is understandable, and insisted Hopkins take down the tweet, she blocked her. Very brave there, Katie. I've mentioned Jack Monroe before. She can be a bit condescending at times, but it's not entirely unfair to call her a bit of a champagne socialist. But she does genuinely care about people and poverty, and she does genuinely try to make the UK a better place, and she has for a long time. She's also a very smart and sharp individual. Katie Hopkins is not a very smart and sharp individual. Not at all. Jack Monroe gave her one last chance to extricate herself from the slanderous mess she created by apologising and making a donation to a migrant rescue charity. So, you can imagine what Katie Hopkins thought of that. Katie obviously didn't believe her and continued to refuse. She'd made a rather silly error in judgment though, and Jack Monroe entirely followed through with her threat and took her to court. To cut a long story short, despite deliberately trying to convince the judge that it's absolutely fine to tell blatant, disrespectful, derogatory lies about a person on a public forum, the case, shockingly, against Katie Hopkins was upheld. She was ordered to pay £24,000 for the first tweet and £8,000 for the second. But surely Katie Hopkins, the successful shock jockey columnist, could afford £32,000 in damages. Well, yeah, she probably could. What she couldn't afford was the other £300,000 that she'd run up in court costs with her continuous insistence that it was right and legal for her to attack anybody she likes with lies and defamation online. Even the shockiest of jockeys doesn't have £332,000 to spare, and neither did Katie. She tried to suggest appealing the decision, but the judge basically mocked her and said it would not change the outcome, she'd just run up even more court costs. I doubt she could afford what she'd run up anyway, because she went on to sell her house in 2018 and applied for an individual voluntary arrangement, which is basically declaring bankruptcy without using the word bankrupt. And they say karma isn't a thing, eh? No wonder she has to spend the days conning people to pay her for telling them conspiracy theories and telling lies to get clicks on Twitter. She's probably more hard up than me and you these days. Fuck you, Casey. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. One of the most common comments I ever get on the 5 Reasons videos is only 5. And I always respond by explaining how I'm trying to keep it concise and not let it go too long. I've clearly failed on this one. This one was particularly hard though. I could have made this video by just choosing 5 of the horrible things she said at random in any one year and still left out so much. She's still spouting disgusting lies all over social media today. Just recently she put out a thoroughly crude video about the disappearance and subsequent death of Jay Slater. A couple of my friends, lads who were actually fathers, showed me the video, expecting me to find it hilarious. I didn't. I was just sitting there wondering, what would they think if it was one of their lads that had died and Katie Hopkins was laughing at their death, telling complete lies about what kind of person they were and making absolutely disgusting sexual remarks about them. I'm not going to repeat what she said, and I won't give her the publicity of putting a link in the descriptions box, but you might have seen it already. Anyway, the best way to support the channel is to like and subscribe, but there are links to PayPal, Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee page in the descriptions box. I suppose That kind of makes this video 6 reasons she's a twat rather than 5, doesn't it? I guess that means I've said a little bit more than I intended to say. Not as much as I could say, obviously, but as much as I'm going to say today. Ta-da-la. Of course, there are a lot of shock jockeys, grifters and paid antagonists out there, lad. Twitter's fucking full of them. Oh, what am I talking about? Dickhead.